to the Rebel Podcast. I'm P. Nate, and this is once again the podcast for cultural engagement and ministry of the Ezra Institute. We are in the middle of this series. I say middle of the series. I don't know when it's going to end. We keep finding guests that we want to talk to about all kinds of things that are going to help us in our desire to win the world. So this particular episode is called Rebuilding Christian Institutions, and I'm joined today by Jamie Bambrick. And Jamie, you're a pastor in Northern Ireland. You're the associate pastor at Hope Church, and you're a YouTuber. You're a blogger. You're sort of I don't know if you hate the term social media influencer, but you kind of do all kinds of things trying to turn the culture around a little bit. You and I got connected because you're the editor-in-chief for Clear Truth Media. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much. And yes, the social media influencer is it's like a dirty word, isn't it? You don't want to be called that. It's you imagine someone that's going to be doing their network marketing. You know, everybody's asked me about my skincare routine. It's like, no, they didn't actually ask you that. So yes, no, but thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
It's sort of the modern day snake oil salesman, right? Like
right. That's exactly it.
I'm social media influencers. Oh, okay, fair enough. But we are doing a pretty, I would say, exciting project together. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about Clear Truth Media, how you got involved in that, how you so you're the editor in chief, and just tell us a little bit about what Clear Truth Media is, why you got involved in it in the first place, kind of what the goal, the vision, all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So I think I'll go back to I suppose the why of our existence. So over the last few years, and I think 2020 was really a clarifying and crystallizing moment for a lot of people, but it had been going on prior to that as well, perhaps not as obviously. We saw that a lot of our major, what you would consider to be conservative evangelical institutions, specifically, and evangelical institutions more broadly, really had caved to a lot of the spirit of the age. And that came to a head in 2020 when there was this very clear confrontation between the ideologies of our day and faithfulness to Scripture. And I think a lot of our institutions that, again, conservative Christians had looked to as good, reliable resources showed up to be slightly less reliable than we perhaps hoped they would be, right? So there was a lot of advocacy for critical race theory, maybe brushing off that term, in some sort of, oh, well, we don't agree with critical race theory, and then just promoting all the points of critical race theory. Or similarly with COVID, when biblical faithfulness really, I think, did require, I can understand early days, churches being a little bit confused and going, I don't have really major criticism there for someone that closed for a couple of weeks. But once it became clear that this was a long-term closure and that this was a very unjust standard, and then churches were sort of being encouraged to get involved in promoting some of this stuff, such as vax mandates and masks. And many churches did go along. I think a few of those things, along with a lot of the drift that we've seen recently on issues such as homosexuality or advocacy for abortion or voting for those that do. So I think all of that has shown that a lot of the online resources, a lot of the big institutions that we look to really just didn't have either as firm a grounding when it came to these issues as we hoped, or were just willing to compromise. And so what we've seen, what me and a few others, and I'll get to my personal involvement in a little bit, but I certainly recognize the same pattern. What a lot of us have recognized is that there are a ton of good people that are pushing back, that are, promoting good content, writing good content, maybe doing good videos, good podcasts, whatever the case may be. But there wasn't much going on where there was a collective effort. And a lot of the reason why those institutions got big was that there was people doing things together, that they were, it was bigger than just one person. There were multiple people involved building something that could therefore, because of that collective reach, impact the wider body of Christ, which I think very many of them did. I think a lot of the tone and tenor and the Overton window of the church has been set by some of those organizations. And we wanted to shift that Overton window in probably what we believe, certainly totally convinced, is a more faithful biblical direction. So, yes, so that idea really came to fruition through a few people. There's a pastor in Ohio called Stephen Whitlow, who has a bit of a business background, and he was friends with Joel Berry of the Babylon Bee. They were having a conversation about this, and they decided, look, we should do something. They put on a little bit of a conference and had people there like Megan Basham and a few other names. Mike Edwards, people may know Mike the Cop. He has a big YouTube channel. He's actually a really solid Christian guy. His channel's all about police work, but very much solid Christian guy. So they put on a few things, and Michael Foster was another one who was involved with that, and people engaged with it, and there was an appetite to go further. I had been posting online for just over a year. I had some stuff go well, got connected with them. They reached out, said, look, we'd be interested in doing this. And through that, ultimately ended up then that we needed someone to put it together and who had the availability and hopefully some of the skills. Whether I have the skills is still TBC, but people think I do at least, which is enough to actually chase things down and pull people together and do some article editing and get things uploaded in a hopefully prompt and timely fashion. All of that kind of stuff going on. So we started then on the 1st of July. Have a whole great bunch of contributors involved, like both yourself and Joe Boot at Ezra, a whole ton of other big names and smaller names, just people that have been faithful and proven themselves to be faithful throughout this period, which we really think was a key thing. Is like, did these guys fight the fight that was in front of them, and do they, or that sets them in good stead for fighting future fights. So we've been going since then, and it's gone great. We've been really blessed by the response so far.
Yeah, and just to kind of, for any of our listeners who hopefully you've seen Dr. Joe Boot and myself sharing a lot of the Clear Truth Media stuff out, but just to kind of share some of the names, and you can go to cleartruthmedia.com and you can see, obviously Jamie and myself, but Joel Berry, as he mentioned, Joe Boot, Tom Askell, you have Rosaria Butterfield, you have guys like Aaron Edwards, who's out in the UK, who has been doing a lot of great stuff, Michael Foster. You have guys like Wes Martin and Tom Price. So there's just been a lot of really solid guys. And as I say some of those names, I don't just say that just to get you to the site. They'll go to the site and check out the content. But as I say that, one aspect of this that I think is actually really important is that as I say that, I think I mentioned names of guys who are historic premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial, Calvinistic, traditionalist. You have Presbyterians and Baptists. You have high church liturgical pastors. You have sort of more contemporary pastors. So I just say that to say there is a sort of ecumenicism here that I think is actually important, because one of the things that I know I've been accused of is the sort of closed-mindedness. And I think, one of the things that we saw through COVID and through the time period that you're talking about is that the people of every stripe and every denomination and every flavor caved, and people of every stripe and denomination and theological affiliation, are represented in what I would call the faithful resistance. And so I think one of the things that Clear Truth Media that really kind of struck a chord with me is it promotes the right kind of ecumenicism, rejects the wrong kind of ecumenicism, and brings people together who are fighting, as you said so well, the battle that's right in front of them, right? Like Jesus was very pointed with the Pharisees, chastising them for not being able to understand the signs of the times in which they lived. And so I think one of the things for Christian pastors and those who want to use their gifts to, whether it's making videos, or Keith Foskey is one of the guys who is hilarious and puts out a lot of really great content, who's involved in Clear Truth Media in the sort of comedy realm of things. But people with all kinds of skills who want to use them to fight the battle that is in front of them. Because I think, as I look at 2020 and the whole time period that you were experiencing, whether it was the Gospel Coalition and some of these, big evangelical institutions that we looked to for some sort of direction. If it was a chapter in a book, the title would sort of be Adventures in Missing the Point, as they were just fighting all the wrong battles at all the wrong times. So maybe talk a little bit about that desire to have this project, be the right kind of ecumenical, but not the wrong kind of ecumenical.
Yeah, right. So we had sort of three. It was slightly longer than this. We fleshed it out in fuller sentences, but we have three sort of core aims that we're aiming for. So one of them is to unite around core doctrine. So for us, we decided, well, what is core to evangelical Christianity? Essentially, was going to be our uniting point. And I think part of the reason for that is that a lot of guys that historically would have found themselves in very different camps ended up finding themselves pushed quite close together as a result of this. And it wasn't maybe over traditional theological lines of difference. So, when I've looked around at guys that have stood up and spoken out, it's been an interesting mix. It hasn't just been. I mean, let's take Gospel Coalition. You might. I was thinking about talking about this later on if we do get to that, as to why institutions fail. But I think one of the things that people wrongly assumed with the Gospel Coalition was that people who called themselves Reformed and Complementarian couldn't go liberal. That guys who were solid, because that's kind of a badge of conservatism, right? As, oh, well, they're Reformed and Complementarian. That must mean that they can't go liberal in any direction. And the reality is that they did go liberal in a number of different directions. And interestingly, there are guys who, would be like, one of the networks that actually has done very well in terms of standing against a lot of this stuff has been like Calvary Chapel. Calvary Chapel is Arminian, and I think they're quite dispensational as far as I know in their eschatology, right? But they have stood firm and they've pushed back, and there's a lot of good people within that network, at least as I've understood it. A lot of the good people I'm looking around at have gone, no, they're pretty solid. You go, turns out they're Calvary Chapel. Well done to them. And you find yourself fighting alongside people that you maybe historically would not have really. Not that we wouldn't have. I don't think anyone would have disowned each other or disliked each other, but you wouldn't have found yourself in the same camp or in running in the same circles. And I think that's a good thing. For me, someone was asking me about what church they should join. They were trying to find a church, and they had their sort of theological, preferences that they wanted. We're in a smaller situation over here in Northern Ireland, and I didn't know if they would find one that looked like that. So my recommendation, my advice was, I would far rather be in a foxhole with someone else whose weapon of warfare is a bit different to mine, and maybe I think is slightly imperfect and has some flaws, but at least they're pointing and shooting in the right direction, as opposed to shooting at their own side or not firing their weapon at all. And so I think conflict has birthed some of that in the church, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's good for actually the church to go, do you know what, on this point of core doctrine, we really are unified, and we can have disagreements. We want to actually set up some debate style pieces on some of these issues, and maybe have events where we talk about differences and do so in a good way. So we're not pretending that everybody's similar, or even that everybody can or should be in the same church or same denomination, but can we join for these fights? Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's really good, and I think the idea there that baptism is an important issue. It's an important theological issue. It has been for a long time in the church, but it is the fight of our day right now, figuring out mode of baptism and who gets baptized and when. when there are millions of preborn children being slaughtered in the womb all the time, and you have evangelical leaders who are being propped up by quote unquote conservative churches who are telling you to vote for people who are fully in favor of that. I think it's just that understanding the severity of our enemies. I remember Doug Wilson one time saying that if there are 100 criminals to be hung, somebody gets hung first and somebody gets hung 99th and 100th. And generally speaking, if I think that paedobaptism isn't the right mode of baptism, then that's a criminal that can be hung down the road, because there's some really notorious criminals that we need to face right now. And I think what we're also learning, and as you talk about sort of debates and being able to talk about some of these differences, is I think when courageous Christians stand shoulder to shoulder together, that we're in a much better position, because we've fought in fights, we've fought in wars and battles together, to actually have those debates, right? I think there's so much
Right.
insecurity in a lot of the Christian elites that they couldn't have those debates well. And I think now a sort of security is being birthed in those who know that they're part of the resistance, know that they're fighting on the right side, where I think there can be some really healthy debates that aren't sort of hamstrung by the insecurity of insecure leaders. So, yeah, that's really good.
Mhm.
In terms of, so one of the reasons I had you on was not just to promote Clear Truth Media, although I think it's a fantastic thing. So I hope all our people go and enjoy the content. But I think it's a good example of sort of the big idea of what we want to get to today, and that is the need to rebuild Christian institutions. So as you were talking about the birth of Clear Truth Media, kind of coming out of everything that went on in 2020 and beyond, what was it about that time period that revealed, I guess, the cracks in the foundations of so many Christian institutions? What is it that has made so many Christian institutions, whether they're parachurch ministries, whether they're, I mean, and I guess naming names is fine. Even
Yeah.
things like Compassion Canada, or
Mm.
Compassion International. I guess I don't know if it's over in Ireland. It's
Yeah, yeah. We have that,
yeah,
yeah.
right. They for years and years and years, sponsor a child from a third world country, and they'll get the gospel and all this kind of stuff. And the way that they bought into CRT and climate change and sort of the race and reconciliation stuff of the BLM movement has just been atrocious. And that's just one example. We've talked about the TGC, talked about Compassion International. We could talk about any of them. But what was the rot at the foundation that caused 2020? Because I don't think 2020 was what shifted them. It's what revealed the cracks in the foundation. So talk a little bit about what causes Christian institutions to collapse and go liberal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably three things that come to mind anyway in that regard. The first one is one that I alluded to, which is an assumption. And it doesn't have to be, by the way, reformed and complementarian. I think TGC did that. But you could do this with any evangelical institution, which is that if someone can, tick a box on a theological statement of faith and do so sincerely, by the way, I think, most of these evangelical institutions that have collapsed, I think they do sincerely hold to the sort of doctrinal statements that there might be the odd person that doesn't, but generally speaking, I think you can go, yeah, they actually do believe what they say they believe, and will take that in good faith. But I think there can be a false assumption there that that is consistently held to, and that person can't go liberal. And so if someone goes, well, I believe in the literal death and resurrection of Christ and the inspiration of Scripture, wonderful, we affirm that, and great. But actually, there are other areas that are important, particularly in any given age. So I think just the assumption that someone who holds to some orthodox doctrinal statement, whatever that looks like for an institution, isn't actually sufficient in and of itself. I think it's a good starting point. But actually, you need to go further, and you do really need to look at how that is applied. So application of these things really, really, really does matter. And it's very interesting that the Apostle Paul, when he's giving qualifications for church leaders. They are largely applicational things. They're largely, does this person live out consistently with their profession of faith? The doctrinal side he obviously argues for in the letters and considers that to be important. John does the same thing, but nonetheless, application is not some secondary thing, and yet it has, I think, been very much moved to a secondary issue. So I would say that that's number one, is how is this person actually applying that given what's in front of them. No, number two is, I would say, that in each age there will be different challenges that do confront the church, or at least a repackaging of old challenges that will look a little bit different. And so this is something that institutions actually need to do over and over again, which is ensure that they are still willing to fight, ensure that they are actually still up for a battle, and that they are going against the spirit of the age and not caving. And the challenge with that is that you actually can't foresee the battles that are coming perfectly well. We were discussing this at length in advance of launching Clear Truth. And we're talking about, well, in a decade, what will it be? What will we be facing? And the reality is, we just actually don't know. You can have some sense of an overall direction, but to know for sure what's going to go on, you can't tell. But someone put it, I think, very helpfully this way. They said, well, what you do, it's like keeping a fence painted white. You paint it once, you paint it at the start, you say, we're committed to painting this fence, but then every year you have to go out and paint the fence again. You have to go back and look at, right, are we caving to the spirit of the age, or are we not? And so I think, a lot of these institutions, Christianity Today or the Gospel Coalition, two that come to mind, there are plenty of others, they certainly started off, I think, in a countercultural manner, but it was the unwillingness to continue being countercultural as things progressed and as new challenges arose from the culture around them that led them down that path. And then I think finally, and this is something that does affect all institutions, and it's a battle that every institution has to fight regularly, which is the tendency for an institution to start existing for the sake of the institution rather than for the mission that the institution was founded to achieve. I heard Nate Wilson do an excellent talk on this. It's stuck with me. I think it's called The Gospel of Winning, and it's well worth looking up. He's Douglas Wilson's son over at with the guys at Canon Press. But he gave the analogy essentially of a warship. You're going out to war, and so you build a battleship, and then eventually everyone starts looking around at this wonderful battleship that you've built and thinks, well, we've got to keep this thing. This was very hard to build, and so you keep it in harbor and you don't take it out to war. And I think institutions do that a lot of the time. I think institutions are often started with a mission in mind. But then people feel like, there's a legacy here. We don't want to damage that. Oh, look, this got lots of clicks, or this got lots of likes, or this actually is drawing in money, like we're getting funding from here. And that's really good for what we're trying to do. And gradually, organizations and institutions shift away from the mission for which they were founded and shift into existing for their own sake. And that's again, these are battles that have to be fought repeatedly, over and over again. You can't just sort of go, we fought that fight. There will always be a tendency, particularly if things go well, to want to continue with that. I even noticed that with us, and we've had some articles that have done very well and great articles, but then the temptation goes, right, can we only do that because that will get a bunch of clicks? And you go, well, no, that's not why we started this thing. So you just do that at scale, and suddenly you see that actually institutions can be very easily corrupted because they want to keep going. They want to have the accolades that they are now receiving. They didn't start for that purpose, but they started to get it. They started to get this credibility. They started to get this funding, and that becomes a precious item that really can't be easily relinquished.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. One of the things that comes to mind as you talk about that third point is a few episodes ago we had C.R. Wiley on, and we were talking a little bit with him, and Chris mentioned that one of the things that he observed was that a lot of leaders who caved and have caved to social pressures um, are those whose livelihood is connected to one thing.
Mm.
And so he was sort of advocating for sort of that anti-fragile home that has multiple income streams, and the idea that the less strings that are attached to you, the better. And so, when you think about that on an institutional level, a lot of Christian institutions are they exist based on donors. So questions begin to
Yeah.
arise. What makes donors happy? You talk about that tendency in all of our hearts to, well, that got a lot of likes, that got a lot of shares, that got a lot of traffic. What, can we move in that direction? And I think when everything that we have is wrapped up, I don't know if you've seen the documentary by Marcus Pittman called "Babies Are Murdered Here," and
No, I
it
haven't seen. I've heard of it.
yeah, it was a great documentary, and he did a follow up one, "Babies Are Murdered Here" too, where he really did a lot of research and investigation into the pro life movement. What they were finding is that a lot of the abolitionist bills that they were pushing through in various conservative states were being most hotly opposed by some of the pro life movement. And some of, and this isn't everybody, obviously, but there are those who, when your livelihood is built around fighting something, there is a almost this shrinking away from actually taking that final blow and killing that dragon, because you recognize that you're a dragon slayer, and if I kill the last dragon, what do
Right.
I do after that, right? And I think that's part of that problem is if the warship kills our enemy, then what's the warship's function?
Mm.
And so I think that that's something as well, as we need to fight like Christians who actually want to win. And
Yeah.
we got to fight like Christians who would rather saunter off into the sunset and become irrelevant because the battle is won, than continue to feel this sense of importance because we're involved in a mission that we don't actually ever want to see the end of.
Yeah, yeah. I think one thought to add to that is just uh, we do have other battles to then fight. Right? It's quite a narrow view of what you're trying to achieve. If you go, yeah, it's just that. It's like, well, actually, the commission is, make disciples of all nations and teach them to obey everything I've commanded you. There's plenty
Yeah,
of other dragons to be slaughtered
yeah,
and fights to be won. And if you think that God doesn't have something else interesting for you after that, it's quite it's almost an unbelieving attitude, And yes, that might mean rebuilding or reorienting, and whatever that may mean. But that's a very sad view of the Christian life. Actually, it's like we can never win a battle because then we'd lose our purpose. It's like, no, there's that won't happen. Even the other side of glory, that won't happen, right? So why would it happen on this side?
yeah, absolutely. And I think so. So let's kind of take this conversation. Let's get practical with it, because I do think that one of the reasons we've seen such success in the very early days of Clear Truth Media is because I think our culture right now is ripe for Christian institutions with backbones. And so this
Mhm.
episode is about rebuilding or building Christian institutions. So why do you think right now is such a good time for Christians to begin to take risks and begin to actually build things that will last, and build things with proper mission and with guardrails against missional drift? So maybe there's a lot of questions in there, but why don't we start with, why do you think right now is such a good time for Christians to begin to build things again?
Yeah, people have been lied to for a very long time, and I think people know they're being lied to, and I think they know it inside the church, and I think they know it outside the church. Actually, I think a lot of people have woken up to the fact that a lot of the Christian leaders have really not done a good job, or have been promoting just blatant untruths. I think something like Shepherds for Sale, Megan Basham's book, which is just out at the time of recording anyway, it is really revealing that there is significant compromise at some of the highest levels of uh, evangelicalism. And I think, to be honest, I don't think it is much of a surprise to anybody. Maybe the extent, but I don't think anybody's going, "Oh my days, yes, how could that have possibly happened? I had no idea." I think everybody's going, "Yeah, that makes total sense. We all saw this. We all witnessed this. We all had even a lot of." Less clued in, just average standard churchgoers, faithful people, but people that are not following the Christian news cycle or high level theology stuff or anything like that, sort of
I
had
kind of
an underlying
described
sense that something's off.
I described Megan's book to a few people who were asking questions about it as sort of she's just cashing in the receipts that none of us had seen, but we all knew were there,
Yeah,
right? Like
right.
it's yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think everybody knows that something is wrong, that there's just been a lot of lies supported, and we're seeing the fruits and the effect of this, right? So you're seeing it in the church with things like, if I look here in the UK, just the collapse of the mainline denominations, and same thing uh, on the other side of the Atlantic as well. I'm sure it's the same in Canada, where they liberalize and everybody disappears, and all the faithful Christians are standing there going, why did we take these decisions, and how did this happen, and how did we get here, and why is our church that used to be good now closing, and why are we preaching this stuff? And so there's this underlying sense, and a lot of people that are being lied to. I think in the world people are recognizing it too. I think that the loss of trust in mainstream media and in politicians. People talk about it as a lot of people are, oh, there's a real crisis of confidence in our institutions and our media. And it's like, yeah, well deserved as well. This was not unmerited. These people lied all the time. They continue to lie. It's just now we have a little bit more access to see what those lies are, and we can dig in, and you can get the information firsthand. Saw it even last night. There was the time of recording anyway. Again. Elon Musk had a conversation with Donald Trump on X Spaces, and it was a perfectly standard Elon Musk Donald Trump conversation, as you might imagine. Donald Trump, does his thing, and he's slightly bombastic, but he's very fluid, and he's interesting, and he makes his points. And you look at all the media, and they're calling this some disaster, and he's rambling and slurring his words. I listened to it; there wasn't any of that at all. It was just and all this time we've been told that Joe Biden is the pinnacle of mental fitness. And you're going, right, there's lies everywhere. And so I think that it is the perfect time for people to speak the truth. I think there's a hunger for truth. I think there's a hunger for people that will proclaim truth uncompromisingly. And a lot of people are recognizing it. I think on a personal level, I'm starting to see this more and more. I think there's a real harvest uh, of non-Christians coming to faith that exists on the right. I think there's a lot of people out there who really are hungry for truth and are genuinely exploring Christianity as the source of that. I've met multiple of them, and some of them made professions of faith, and so that's something the church needs to lean into. At the same time, it's also what's that class? Is it? I think it's an Orwell quote. In a time of universal deceit, speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. And so there's a need for courage within that. That doesn't make it an easy thing to do. We've just seen it in the last week, people jailed in the UK for Facebook posts. We were talking about it just prior to coming on, that there's a real genuine discussion that Christians who want to be faithful over here are having of when are we going to start going to jail for our beliefs? And the answer is pretty soon, and some already have at least been arrested and are getting charged. So there is definitely a need there, but it will also require courage.
Yeah, and I think you said that very well in terms of this desire for pun intended here, I guess, but clear truth is one of the things that we've seen the decline of so many, as you said, mainline churches, Christian influencers, public pastors, Christian institutions, as we saw them sliding left. The rhetoric was always nuanced, always, vague, always muddled. it was that, I think you said it earlier. I can't remember if it was before we were recording or after, where you talked about, they'd sort of reject CRT and they'd say, oh, we don't believe in critical race theory, and then they would go on to promote all of the tenets of critical race theory. So this double speak, this vagueness, this just deception, nuance, shielding and hiding. I think of some of those evangelical leaders that when they're asked, clear questions, their answers are just like, they started sounding more and more like politicians. And so I say all that simply to
Yeah.
say that I think now is the time where people are just hungry for plain, clear truth. Just say it like it is. And I think that will, and I imagine, you're on the inside track. You work for Clear Truth. I've just contributed a couple articles at this point, but so I imagine you have gotten more of the backlash. But I'd be interested, because one of the things that I would say, one of the values, or one of the things that we're trying to do, is communicate truth clearly and not worry about nuance and caveats and all this kind of stuff. Just say the truth, say it like it is. But in a culture, especially a Christian culture, that has gotten so doped up on nuance and caveats and tone, that opens us up to the charge of just being mean spirited, and so talk maybe a little bit about whatever the institution is that Christians ought to be building right now. Just the need to be clear and not worry about nuance, and be willing to be charged with the accusation of being a big meanie.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll give an example of this that is very relevant, and hopefully it'll be helpful then to people that hear. Back in 2020, I was in a different church context, and one of the things that happened there was obviously Black Lives Matter. That was a real challenge for that church, and I was probably one of very few people who was willing to sit on the other side of that. And go, no, here are the issues with this movement, and with the ideology that undermined it. And it ended up, I somehow managed to get it that we were going to, unfortunately never got released, and you'll hear why it didn't get released after, but we managed to have a series of conversations where I was essentially the counterpoint to some of the bigger names in UK evangelicalism on this topic. And I didn't know quite what their positions would be. I assumed they would probably be left-leaning. They were further left-leaning than I had imagined. But the conversations were very cordial. I definitely spoke least, and but did so by design. But also, I knew exactly what I was going to say, and so we recorded this series of conversations. And at the end of it, the moderator said that was an incredible example of how to disagree agreeably, and it was just a very the tone of it was thoughtful and kind, but there was very sharp points of disagreement that were drawn, and I thought it was brilliant and would have been a real blessing to the church to have heard these ideas unpacked. Unfortunately, all of those who were on the other side decided that this must never see the light of day, which shows that my impression that I thought it went well was probably right. And but the thing was that, what did they come back with? Well, they came back with, well, we didn't like the tone. And that you have to reject that, because that is a lie. And I said as it was rejected to the person who had organized it, if I had agreed with them, would they have minded my tone? And he was, no, obviously not. It was like, no, so it wasn't tone then, it was content. The issue was content. The issue was they didn't like what I was saying, and tone became the excuse for shutting down disagreement. And so Christians actually need to toughen up to that. You need to be above that. It's emotional sabotage. It's emotional manipulation. It is pulling on the strings of empathy and victimhood in order to prevent someone from speaking truth. And sometimes you can say things that do have a bad. It's not that there isn't you get to be unkind to people. Like you do have to try to think through if that is a valid accusation. But overwhelmingly, particularly in our day and age, it's going to be a false accusation. And certainly, if you model yourself on Christ or the prophets or the apostles, you'll find that winsomeness was often not present with their words. They were quite willing to be very direct, very clear, very confrontational, say things that if I said them, I would probably think I was sinning by pushing it that far. They really did push it to the limit, and yet it was done. It's the word of God. Jesus, the most loving person in human history, who died for the sins of those whom he was speaking against, in many cases, um, was also willing to use language like that. So you actually just need to get used to it. You need to, as scriptures say, Matthew 5, rejoice when people speak against you and utter all kinds of falsehoods for my name's sake. You just need to go, yeah, it's a false accusation. I don't receive it, and that actually is a sign to me that I'm doing something right.
Yeah. And I think as we encourage our listeners to kind of rebuild or build Christian institutions, I think that there is a whole host. I mean, we've named some names throughout this episode, but I think there's a whole host of sort of the destroyed ruins of previously great Christian organizations. And I think that as you think through rebuilding them, obviously Clear Truth Media is a media platform, blogs and videos and sermons and all that kind of stuff. But we need child sponsorship programs. We need missions
Right.
organizations. We need teen discipleship programs like YWAM. That's actually not going to slide left. That's not going to descend into anarchy and all kinds of different things. We need advocacy groups. We need pro-life advocacy groups that have a backbone, that understand the fight that we're in. We need crisis pregnancy centers. We need, like, there are so many things. So as we're talking here, and I know we've been talking a lot about this media platform, but we're using that as a sort of example of seeing the failures of the TGC in some of these places, and a need that arose. And I think Clear Truth Media is a really good example that it is the right time. People are hungry for these things. But I would even just say to some of our listeners, if you own, it might not even be a Christian institution. If you own a business, if you own a welding shop or whatever, what I would say to you is, don't succumb to the DEI, regulations. Put policies in place that uphold God's law, incentivize people to get married and have kids, and just run your organization in a clear and distinctly Christian way, and fight all of the ways that it can, guard yourself against all the ways that it can slide left like any other institution. And I think as you listen to this, I hope that you're not just hearing what Jamie has done in terms of practical application of all that we're talking about, but think through what are the things, the opportunities God's laid in front of you, the desires and the interests that God's put on your heart, and where is there a need in our culture for Christians to do that faithfully, courageously, and with clear truth, at the bedrock of it. Anything you want to say to that in terms of the broadness of the call to build Christian institutions?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I've been very encouraged. I'll give them a shout out. I've been doing a little bit of work with guys called Decision Point, and what they're doing is they're doing evangelism in public schools. They're finding these kids that are in public schools and they're not able to go in themselves because they're not allowed to have outside organizations. So they're raising up young people to do evangelism, but it's countercultural. Like, they're taking on the LGBT groups in the schools. They're seeing people come to faith through it. They're doing a whole bunch of testimonies with some people like Rosaria Butterfield, former lesbian activist, someone like Laura Perry Small, a former transgender woman. She's a woman who's formerly identified as transgender. And bringing that into public schools, and there are things like that. There are things that are not, it's having that as like, yeah, we are willing to push back against the spirit of the age. I think is essential, and I love seeing organizations that are doing that. And so, yeah, just amen everything you say there.
Yeah. And one of the things that I often say to young people who ask about God's calling on their life, I often say that you generally you find your calling, at the sort of Venn diagram intersection of your talents and your abilities, the God-given interests that you have and the opportunities that are in front of you. And so I just say that to say, there might be a lot of young people who are listening to this and are thinking through, what is it that God's calling me to do right now? And I would say at that look in the intersection of those three things, and then look at the world around us and where are things failing, and especially when as we're talking about this, I know in Canada there's things like Athletes in Action, there's Power to Change on campuses, university campuses, but all of these Christian institutions that started off really, really great are at this crossroads right now, and they need good people to come in. And there might be CEOs, and there might be presidents of Christian legal fellowships and all kinds of different things that need the encouragement to stay faithful. They need people to come alongside them and encourage them, because believe me, there are enough people whispering in their ears to say it's okay. It's okay to cave to this. It's okay to cave to that. It's okay if you do this. And so, one of the other things we can say in terms of rebuilding is getting involved and encouraging faithfulness. You don't know how life-giving that is. And in a lot of private, off the record conversations that I had with pastors through the whole COVID thing, you would be shocked at how many pastors, I think, actually had their heads screwed on straight, but did not have the support. And when it came down to it, I think acted cowardly because they didn't have the support that they needed. And I think with a few more people whispering courageous things in their ears, things could have looked differently. And so recognize that power is not inherently wrong. And so looking for influence and looking to influence others in order to save some of our Christian institutions or rebuild them or to build new ones, I think is a good and godly pursuit right now. So Jamie, just as we wrap up this conversation, where can people find you? Where can they follow you? You have a YouTube channel. You have a very active Twitter account. You preach from time to time. And obviously you write articles on Clear Truth Media. But where can people find you and all that you're doing?
Yeah, so just search for my name. So Jamie Bambrick, which is hard to spell. You can spell either of those names multiple different ways, but you'll probably have it somewhere on this. So find that, copy and paste it. Do that on YouTube, do that on Twitter. That's where I am. And then Clear Truth Media, any articles I post on there are under my name as well. And that's all the best places to find me.
Awesome. So for everybody who's listening, go and rebuild, go and build. Take the courage that you are on the winning side. This world belongs to Christ, and he is not going to abandon it to his enemy. And so we can be bold, we can be courageous, and we can build things knowing that if we are on his side, then what we build will have an impact on the trajectory of the world. Thanks for being with us, Jamie, and we'll see you all next time.